I worked for 2 years at the oldest hospital in my city. Several stories rose from the unusual events that always seem to happen on these sort of places. Some even became urban legends, passed down from generation to generation of employees. For the longest time, I thought they were just a lame attempt to scare newcomers. But I was wrong. On a day much similar to this one, my boss walked out of his office and over to our work area. His eyes moved over from one engineer to the next, as if carefully studying each and every one of us. "All right, folks, we need to store some equipment over at the 10th floor. Most of the other engineers flinch at his command. Isaac and Victor, the senior service engineers, glanced at each other with a troubled look. "Sure thing," I said. Both of the old and grizzled men gawked back at me. As a rookie of the service department, I wanted to stand out. I was tired of them referring to me as the overconfident fletching fresh out of college. Victor sat back down at his workstation. He reached for one of the screwdrivers inside his toolbox and started removing the back of the patient monitor in front of him. He had just finished putting it back together, though. Isaac fled to the ICU to grab a hold of a defibrillator. Its calibration was conveniently due that day, or so he blabbered before pacing frantically out of the office. "Okay, you'll be in charge of it, Anthony," my boss said. The mission was simple. Move a couple of electrosurgical units to the 10th floor of the hospital. I didn't think much into it until Celia, our aide, chimed in. "You're going to the 10th floor? By yourself?" she asked me in astonishment. "Yeah. Why?" Celia fixed her long and unruly auburn hair. Her eyes strayed out to the wall in front of her, and for a moment I felt like she was no longer with me, but away in a completely different world. "Well, you know what they say about that floor." I frowned. "What about it?" "It's cursed." Her hands were now clasped together, trembling ever so slightly. I'd never seen Celia behave this way before. "I wouldn't go alone if I were you," she whispered. "How come?" "I ain't afraid of no ghost," I said as I let out a small chuckle, trying to enlighten up the mood. Celia pursed her lips. "You should." An unshakable feeling of unease crept up on me. Did something happen up there? "You're better off not knowing. I'll let you know when you come back." "Why can't you tell me right now?" Celia crossed her arms and sighed. "Because if I did, you probably wouldn't go up there." "You're up, Anthony. The units are here and ready for transport," a voice echoed behind me. My boss stood halfway across the front floor, with one of his hands holding onto a blue cart, 4 large cardboard boxes laid on top of it. "Yes, sir," I said. The elevators were practically at arm's reach from our front door, so my boss lingered outside with me as I waited for my ride. "Sir?" "Yes?" "What exactly is on the 10th floor?" My boss looked up into the ceiling. "It's a patient wing, pretty much identical to the 9th floor." "A pediatric wing? I do know the 9th floor, but I've never been to the 10th, I said, still confused. Every patient wing had at the very least a defibrillator in use. These devices are recalibrated every 6 months and checked weekly in order to make sure that they are working properly. Having serviced every single defibrillator in the building, or so I thought, I couldn't understand how I had never even heard of this floor. "It's not in use right now," my boss said as he tapped on one of the fake ceiling tiles. "I hear a leak. Do you hear a leak up here?" If there was such a leak, I couldn't hear it. My mind looped around Celia's words over and over. "I'll have someone check this later," my boss said, seemingly defeated after probing half of the tiles on the ceiling. Good afternoon. Where are we going? The elevator operator asked. 10th floor, please, my boss said as he placed his hand on my shoulder. I smiled back at him, nodded, and pushed my card inside. There was a knot in the pit of my stomach now, and seeing my boss wave at me like the way you say goodbye to the sailors braving out into the ocean made the tangle even worse. The doors closed, but the storm of thoughts inside my head made me oblivious, for a few seconds, to the fact that we were not moving at all. Are you okay, miss? I asked. The operator's hands hovered just above the button labeled as 10. She snapped her head upright. What? Oh, yeah, 10th floor, right? I just gotta store this over at room 1021. It'll be quick, I said, hoping as well that my words were true. She pulled the bottom ends of her pink vest, which every woman working here had to wear, and pressed the button. You know what happened up there? I asked. Some say a bunch of kids died from a virus, so they had to shut it off. Others mumbled about a nurse who went insane and mutilated them with a pair of scissors. I wiped off the sweat gushing out of my palms onto my jumpsuit. But they're all just made up, right? Sounds like a bunch of nonsense to me, but other operators have experienced some wacky stuff, she said as she hugged her log notebook tighter across her chest. Our world came to a stop and the doors opened once again. The elevator's lights pierced a couple of feet in front of us, but other than that, everything was enveloped in it by a looming darkness. End of the road, she said. I pushed the card out into the black. I took out my phone and activated the flashlight. A long and narrow corridor stretched out from the elevator lobby. You'll have to look for room 1021, she said as she pointed over to the lineup of wooden doors. Thanks. Could you wait for me, perhaps? I promise I won't take long, I pleaded. She shrugged. Sorry, I can't. Got patience to move around. But you can hit the button over there when you're ready. I'll come back for you. Just don't forget about me, okay? I won't, she said as she pressed one of the buttons inside her cabin. She then disappeared behind two slabs of thick metal, leaving me with no way to go but forward. The whole room felt wrong from the very start. With every step I took, I heard two behind me. I kept telling myself that they were probably echoes from the patient wing below. I whipped my flashlight back a couple of times, trying to catch a glimpse of my stalker, but the only thing I could make out was the faint glow of the landing indicator on the other side of the hall. As I finally reached the storage room, I held its knob for a moment, dreading what I would find on the other side. Its cold metallic touch made every inch of my skin crawl, but having come this far, I had to see this through. I opened the door. The room was filled with cartoon trains moving along their tracks. They all had a freakishly stretched out grin. In any other place, I would have dismissed them as merely kooky decorations, but up here, their eerie smiles carried a different vibe. I knew that if I turned my back on them, I'd regret it. I started tossing the boxes inside. They bounced and slid across the room, creating clouds of unsettled dust that clogged the back of my throat. As the third box hit the ground, the shuffling out in the hall suddenly grew into a clobber of violent stumps. I hurled the last box inside and slammed the door shut. I then grabbed my cart and raced through the hallway. I ran as fast as I could, desperately trying to create some distance between myself and the stampede closing in behind me. Just at the corner of my eyes I could see shadows, bodies of absolute black that clawed at the walls, ripping the paint apart. All of the room doors I rushed through creaked and bent, as if a large man was pounding on them from the other side. A flurry of whispers assaulted my ears, slurring out words and phrases I could not make out. My legs burned with exquisite pain. I am no athlete, but at that moment, as I ran through the hellish corridor, pursued by what I could only assume was the devil himself, I became one for a brief couple of seconds. I approached the elevator panel and punched the button with my fist. The landing indicator read 2, an eternity away from 10. As an overwhelming fear engulfed me, I braced myself for my impending death. But nothing happened. Everything around me just stopped. The growls, the bangs, the whispers, they were all replaced by an oppressive silence. I was once again alone, rattling every bone in my body as a pulsing ache started building up in my smashed knuckles. The indicator read 6 now, and even though I couldn't sense any danger around me, I didn't dare to look. My eyes remained glued to the landing indicator. The numbers kept going up. 7, 8, 9. All of a sudden, I felt a soft tug at the left side of my jumpsuit, similar to the way a child yanks at his mother's skirt when he wants her attention. My eyes tried to get a glance, but my neck wouldn't budge. It was as if my body refused to gaze at whatever horrible abomination stood behind me. "Are you okay, sir?" a familiar voice asked. My head instinctively turned around. "Geez, you don't look very well, Sonny. Did you see a ghost or something?" I leaped inside and placed myself at the very back of the elevator cabin. I fifth floor, please. "You're not going to take your car?" she asked joyfully, probably still confused by my trembling limbs and crackling voice. "Leave it. Go. Please," I muttered. She stepped out and reached for the cart. "Here, see? It's not so..." An explosion of screams bursted out of the corridor. Hundreds, no, thousands of wails blasted right into our ears. Before I could even warn her, some unseen force cracked the operator's body in half and swooped her off violently into the black hallway. The elevator's doors then snapped shut, and I found myself falling in abysmal darkness. According to the chief engineer of security, Mr. Doyle, the suspension rope slid out of the main drive. 2 of the safety switches also decided to malfunction at that exact moment. The elevator car slid down 5 floors before coming to a halt at the 5th floor. 10 minutes later, they were able to deform one of the doors and drag me out, mostly unharmed. "Damn old thing. You're lucky that cabin got stuck by the other 2 switches and the hoistway. Otherwise you would have ended up at the 4th basement, with most of your bones all gooey," Mr. Doyle said once I was out of the collapsed steel cage. "The official story is that the hospital had an elevator malfunction, and one of its operators went missing. The facility reported to the authorities that Miss Kendra Whittaker, the operator, didn't go to work that day. I stormed into Mr. Doyle's office once I learned about the lie. There must have been something that got caught in the cameras." "We don't keep cameras up there," he said while sipping out of his morning coffee. "What? How come? The whole damn place is littered with them. You're saying not a single one is up there?" "Raises more questions than answers. Mr. Levinson himself ordered so. Bad press," he said as he pointed to the door I had just barged in. "Don't go poking around, kid. I'm sorry about what happens to Miss Whittaker, but I'm just doing my job." I couldn't believe it. The owner of the hospital, Mr. Levinson, was covering it all up. I decided to quit my job and head over to the authorities. Someone had to speak up. "But Anthony, why now? You're a brilliant worker. What can I do to change your mind?" my boss asked, visibly heartbroken after I laid him the news. "I can't stop thinking about Kendra Whittaker. The operator, she went missing. There's nothing you could have done about it." "She didn't go missing, and you all know it." My boss's panicked expression faded away, making way to a sinister glare. "What do you mean? Is there anything you wish to report to Mr. Levinson?" "No." "Good," he said, shifting back to a smile and triumphant grin. My employer got his threat across, loud and clear. I still filed my resignation though. A part of me feared that they would try to silence me. But I played the role they wanted. Whenever they talked about the 10th floor legends, I'd sing along knowing very well the sort of evil that hides up there. Maybe that's why I was allowed to walk away. I was hoping that by writing this, I would feel better about it. But I don't. In a way, I don't think I'm any better than my former boss or coworkers, staying quiet in order to save my own skin. Still, there's a monster far more wicked than whatever lurks in that forgotten, dust-ridden floor. A demon that hides under human skin, a sly smile, and a soft-spoken voice. And its name is John Nathaniel Levinson.